The ScotRail Class 158 by Skyhook Games is a train sim world add-on that I previously covered when it was first released, but following a long overdue update, I thought it was time to revisit this thing and see how she fares in late 2025. This add-on was first released in July 2024, during the TSW4 era. Back then, it cost a hefty 25 New Zealand dollars at full price, and the price has not changed for the version compatible with TSW6. This was not the first time we got a Class 158 in TSW, as we already had an East Midlands Trains variant with Skyhook's Midland Mainline route of April 2023. There have been some alterations to the model, most notably where the headlight clusters and cab interiors are concerned. However, I am still of the opinion that the ScotRail variant is too expensive for what is essentially a gameplay pack. A more reasonable price would have been around $10, if you ask me. In December 2024, the Leavenmouth Rail Link livery was added to the Class 158 pack as a free update, but it wasn't until the 29th of October 2025 when the Fife Circle Sprinter timetable update was finally released. I can't remember how long ago it was when the update was first announced, but I remember having to wait an absolute toad's age for it. Not helping the situation was the fact that the update got pushed back to TSW6. It's almost as if Dovetail did that deliberately to try and increase sales figures for the quote-unquote new iteration of the game, even though the practice of annual releases already has plenty of critics. Before anyone rushes to bring up the free starter pack and tries to use it as a defense against any slight criticism of TSW6, I will remind you of a major problem with the FSP. It's only temporary, which means that, if, for whatever reason, you're unable to upgrade to TSW6 until after the free offer has expired, or if you're hesitant at first and end up missing the deadline, you will have no choice but to buy the standard edition or a region-specific edition of the game. If Dovetail are going to keep doing annual releases until the cows come home, they should, at the very least, keep the free starter pack going for the entire annual cycle instead of just a feeble 6 weeks. In any case, the presence of a free starter pack doesn't change or excuse the fact that TSW6, and the Birmingham to Crewe route for that matter, launched in a very rough state, not to mention the various problems with existing add-ons that still need fixing. On a personal note, I saw a decent amount of Class 158 sprinters in person during my UK trip, although none of them were the ScotRail units. Unfortunately, I never went into Scotland, and the only ScotRail trains I saw were this pair of Class 156 units in Carlisle. Thinking back to the Class 158s, let's do a sound comparison between a real unit and her in-game counterpart. As I said in my video about the Riviera line in Train Sim World 6, I would like to see Skyhook make a Great Western Railway variant of the Class 158, as these units can often be seen in Devon, and by extension Cornwall, in real life. On a second personal note, I once had the pleasure of riding aboard 158959 from Lostwithiel to Plymouth. Then a few days later, I rode aboard 158762 from Fratton to Portsmouth Harbour. If we ever get a proper GWR 158 pack in TSW, I think it should A. be set at a reasonable price of no more than $10 at the absolute most expensive, and B. include the normal 2-car variant along with these unusual 3-car sets, where one driving coach from another unit is coupled to an existing 2-car set. When the Scottish 158 was first released, she only had a new timetable for the ScotRail Express Edinburgh to Glasgow route. Personally, I think it's a bit annoying when a new timetable for an existing route can only be accessed if you buy another add-on, as was also the case with the Class 380 German Haggis, a train that you have to buy if you want the new Cathcart Circle timetable. In any case, the new timetable for ScotRail Express features 62 playable services for the Class 158, 16 services for the Class 170, 187 services for the Class 385, and 38 services for the German Haggis. For reference, the Class 385 is the only train included with the ScotRail Express route as standard, and, in my opinion, leaves a lot to be desired in her default state, especially where the sounds are concerned. The 158 is used primarily on Edinburgh to Dunblane services, which are only drivable for around 27 minutes between Edinburgh and Polmont, and she can also be seen on a few Edinburgh to Glasgow services for some reason. Meanwhile, the 170's playable services represent part of the Glasgow to Aberdeen run, but these are only playable on the short section between Glasgow Queen Street and Croy, which takes around 16 minutes to complete. As for the 3-car Class 380/0, she is used on Glasgow to Alloa services, which, again, are only playable as far as Croy, while the 4-car Class 380/1 supplements the 4-car Class 385/1 on Glasgow to Edinburgh services. The 3-car Class 385/0 can also be driven on shorter services between Glasgow Queen Street and Croy, or between Edinburgh and Polmont. If you ask me, I think linearity is the biggest problem on the ScotRail Express route, and it could really do with those extra branches to Anniesland, Dunblane, and Alloa, not to mention the Bowness and Kinneil Railway. The Class 801 is used to represent services from London King's Cross to Stirling, Aberdeen, or Inverness, and for some reason, these services are playable between Edinburgh Waverley and Polmont. This is despite the fact that 801s cannot run these services in real life due to only having one diesel engine per unit, and that engine is only for emergency use. All the more reason why Dovetail should not have omitted the Class 800 from ECML Peterborough to Doncaster. To my frustration, and despite how out of place it looks in Scotland, the HST from Great Western Express was used as a timetable mode layer to represent the ScotRail HSTs. Okay, sure, you have the option to disable that layer, but it doesn't make the current lack of a proper ScotRail Into 7 Cities livery in-game any less annoying. As for why I'm using real footage of a Great Western HST, it's simply because I didn't want to see this thing on the Scottish route in TSW again. Thinking back to the long-awaited Sprinter timetable on Fife Circle, this features 52 playable services for the Class 158, 35 services for the Class 170, and 3 services for the Class 66 diesel locomotive and railhead treatment train. The Class 170 Turbostar is the only train included with the Fife Circle route as standard, and still has that annoying issue where the unit numbers are incorrect for the style of headlight cluster that's been modelled. In any case, the 158 and 170 work together or separately on services from Edinburgh Waverley up to Dundee, Leven, Codenbeath, and Glenrothes with Thornton. Unfortunately, the Dundee services are only playable as far as Markinch, which is a very strange place to cut the route coverage if you ask me. It's also worth mentioning that you finally have the option to run empty stock moves to and from Haymarket Depot. There may only be 9 services to and from the depot in the timetable, but 9 is better than nothing. Meanwhile, the German haggis and Class 385, or should that be Japanese haggis, also appear in the Fife Circle timetable, but their services are only playable between Edinburgh Waverley and Haymarket. The LNER Class 801 and Avanti West Coast Class 390 can also be seen on AI-only services at Edinburgh Waverley, thus making the rail scene at this station feel a little bit more realistic. But not completely realistic, as the station does still feel a little bit lifeless sometimes. I was intrigued to see this mention of a ScotRail Inter7 Cities HST in the layers list for Fife Circle, even though I haven't got any mods installed to get that livery. I see this as an indicator of a long overdue official ScotRail HST add-on finally coming to TSW at some point. Come to think of it, if they're going to make an HST variant for Fife Circle, why is West Cornwall Local still being left in the dust with no Valenta-powered intercity HST? Automatic announcements were listed as one of the updates to the Class 158, but on my first attempt at driving a 158 following the update, I noticed a problem with the announcements. The voice went silent instead of listing the remaining intermediate stops, which in this case were Linlithgow, Edinburgh Park, Haymarket, and Edinburgh Waverley.
Welcome to the ScotRail service to Edinburgh Waverley. Calling at...
In other news, the 158 still doesn't have any exhaust effects. Go figure. To add to the records of announcement faults, I never heard of the Scottish woman say words to the effect of, "We will soon arrive at Linlithgow," or anything else on the rest of this journey to Edinburgh, for that matter. Considering the fact that announcements were touted as one of the grand and wonderful core features of TSW6, these malfunctioning announcements on the 158 are not a good look for the developers, if you ask me. Before moving on to the conclusion, let's not forget this atrocious rendition of Ball Green tram stop. And I also wanted to show you the weird lighting transition as trains leave the tunnels and return to daylight. This issue is not isolated to the ScotRail Express route, and it left me wondering, surely this could be fixed, right? As yet another addition to the records of malfunctioning announcements, I noticed another one on an AI service at Glasgow Queen Street. In this case, the woman skipped over the train's destination and list of intermediate stops.
Welcome to the ScotRail service to... Calling at... If you see something that doesn't look right, speak to staff or text the British Transport Police on 61016. We'll sort it. See it, say it, sorted.
Meanwhile, there's an unnecessary invisible wall at Croy, located on the steps at the eastern end of Platform 2. Why this invisible wall still hasn't been removed, or why it's even here in the first place, is anyone's guess. Over on Fife Circle, you can find a whole lot of foliage on the track between Dalgety Bay and Aberdour, when I don't think it should be placed there. Meanwhile, there are some trees placed too close to the track just north of Kirkcaldy, to the point where they're clipped by passing trains. For some reason, there are headways of up to 90 minutes for services to and from Leven. I thought this line was supposed to get consistent hourly services throughout the day. When I was making notes for this video, I realised that it's not just the Leven branch. The whole route north of South Gyle and Edinburgh Gateway just feels empty, even in the new timetable, and there's not really any variety where motive power is concerned. At present, It's just 158s, 170s, and almost nothing more. If you haven't got the ScotRail Class 158 yet and are curious to try it out, I would highly recommend waiting for a sale and buying her then. I thought this add-on was a rip-off when it was first released, and I still believe that to be the case. Let's be reminded of the fact that this is just a modified variant of a DMU that we already had in the game, and although this thing is more useful now than she was at initial release, it's ridiculous that we had to wait at least 10 months for the Fife Circle timetable update. As for where I'd rate the ScotRail Class 158 in her current state, I think she deserves a 6 out of 10.